All right, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. My name is Guy McPherson. My mission is to raise the awareness of trauma and to support and inspire new trauma therapists just starting out on the trauma-informed journey. I do that with my membership community, Trauma Therapist 2.0, my online courses and workshops, and the Trauma Therapist newsletter. If you're a therapist of any kind and you work with individuals who've been impacted by trauma, I invite you to head on over to my website at thetraumatherapistproject.com. That's thetraumatherapistproject.com. All right, let's get started. All right, Clara, you ready to do this?
Ready.
Okay, so 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. I am very excited to have as my guest today, Clara Martin. Clara, welcome.
Thank you. It's very good to be here.
Appreciate that. So Clara medically retired from the U.S. Army with PTSD from military sexual trauma and chronic migraines. She went to work as a peer counselor victim advocate at a local nonprofit and decided that she absolutely did not need therapy. 9 months later, after suffering a psychotic breakdown and being 51-50'd by her concerned mother and brother, Clara realized that was probably not the best decision she'd ever made.
Yep.
The recovery process was a long and arduous one, aided by an incredibly supportive family, community of friends, a fantastic therapist and psychiatrist, volunteer work and disaster relief with Team Rubicon, crisis hotlines, and the writing of 3 books. Clara just finished her first graduate course in clinical mental health counseling. Congrats on all of that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So welcome to the podcast.
It's very good to be here. I'm really excited to be able to share my story. This is something that I think affects not only the community of professional counselors, but also there's a lot of people out there, especially in the veteran community, who are like, therapy? What's that? I don't do therapy. I don't talk about stuff no. So, having the chance to hopefully address some of those concerns, I'm also really excited about.
Awesome. Well, yeah. So let's start out here. What the heck happened?
Yeah, good question. So starting at the beginning, I commissioned into the United States Army as a second lieutenant. I earned a ROTC scholarship to the University of Virginia, graduated with distinction, very proud of myself. And went to my first duty station at Fort Lewis.
How old were you at this point?
I was 22.
Okay.
And it was an experience. The military is very, very different from any community, any civilian community that you can imagine. And it was, it was awesome. It was challenging. I made amazing friends. I also met some people that made me think you might be the clinical definition of a psychopath. Not an expert here, but you're kind of making me a little nervous.
Why did you go into the military? What drew you in the first place?
My father served in the Navy, and I really respected his commitment to service, his patriotism. I loved being able to move around the country and even overseas. I met incredible people, had amazing experiences. My mother also served as a NCIS agent. And this was back in the 1980s when, women going into law enforcement was, they didn't quite look at you maybe like you had horns coming out of your head, but it was a close thing. So I got to high school, and this was 2008. I was graduating, and it was the height of, it was really when the Iraq War was starting. Afghanistan was already in progress. And I just remember looking around and being very angry because everyone in my high school was talking about how awful things were and how somebody needed to do something. And nobody was doing anything, it seemed like. So with all the fervor of an 18-year-old, I was like, I'm joining the Army. And my father said something that sounded a lot like over my dead body. And I went like, okay. I waited until he was at sea. And then I applied for and accepted my Army ROTC scholarship.
Wow.
Love you, Daddy. He's listening to this. Accepting that Army ROTC scholarship was, I look back at it and go, that was actually a really good decision. I got to go to the University of Virginia. They really emphasize practical leadership skills in a way that a lot of students my age didn't. I got to intern at the JAG school as a undergraduate legal intern. I had a very fancy name, very fancy title. I felt very proud of myself. But that experience also led me to volunteer at a domestic violence shelter in my community, shelter for help in emergencies. I started volunteering as a peer counselor on my college hotline. And the leadership training that Rotc gave me actually led me to become the student head of that peer crisis hotline. I work very closely with the college's head of the counseling services to make sure that there was kind of a stopgap between students who needed mental health but didn't feel comfortable going in to get clinical treatment and the actual clinical treatment itself.
Now, just forgive me. So this was while you're still in school?
That's correct.
Okay.
So, graduation came around. I commissioned. Now at that point, let me emphasize, I was weird, but I was not crazy. At least not yet. And I use crazy as a technical term. But joined the Army, went to my duty stations. I'm going to skip over the details of the events because they do involve other survivors. And I don't know that they would feel comfortable with me going into that much detail. But suffice to say, I ended up at Fort Stewart, Georgia, pretty much a complete wreck mentally. I was having nightmares. I'd started drinking fairly heavily, and going to Fort Stewart was kind of the Army's way of saying, you went through some bleep, we're going to give you a fresh start, and we want you to have a chance at a good career. When I got to Fort Stewart, I was actually incredibly lucky because I had a very, very supportive command. And they encouraged me to start going to counseling, which I did. I started going to counseling. Things seemed to get better.
So, hold on. So
sure.
You didn't want to give details of this abuse that happened?
Correct.
Okay. How long after you had commissioned did it happen?
Not very long, honestly. It was a matter of months.
Oh, wow.
And yes, and like I said, this did involve other people, but I remember going in to talk to the command team there. We tried to report it. And I remember sitting there with the colonel and the sergeant major and, another survivor next to me. We did not have a sharp rep present, which we later learned was actually a violation of Army policy. But I remember that NCO, that sergeant major, looking right at me and saying, I know this guy. He would not do that. And I was looking back at him and going like, well, he did. It is very unfortunate that the Army and the military in general has this problem. I think people are becoming more aware of it, but there's also no denying that it is still absolutely a problem. And I remember just going back to post and hearing all these rumors flying about, oh, something happened. Oh, it was this guy. Oh, well, he didn't do it. And I was just sitting there, very quietly going like, I would like to throttle you all. Now I didn't, but looking back, that was probably the start of some of my anger problems. So I went to Fort Stewart, other side of the country. I started getting counseling, started getting help.
Did they send you off?
Yes.
Okay.
It's a complicated process. And the military does sometimes enable soldiers to request transfers in cases of in sharp cases. In this case, My orders there were coming to an end anyway, along with that of the other soldiers who had reported. So they just kind of went like, okay, convenient, like how about we go. But by the time I got to Fort Stewart, like I said, I was not in a good mental headspace. And then unfortunately, and this is something that I actually really want to touch on, because people do not realize that once you have become a victim of a crime, particularly of a sexual nature, like sexual assault, sexual harassment, anything like that, it is actually, you are statistically more likely to be re-victimized. And that is what happened to me. I got to Fort Stewart. My boundaries were down. I was carrying a lot of guilt over what had happened. My whole training had prepared me to be this very strong, very strong leader. And then, not even a couple of months into the Army, and this happens. And so I was wondering, I remember just looking at myself and going, what is wrong with me? How did I fail? How can anybody trust me to lead if I myself have become a victim? So, I got to Fort Stewart in that headspace. And I just remember, being offered help on op ords, which are operation orders, which is a very important part of military doctrine and like operations. I remember being offered help by someone, and I came to trust him. And slowly, like looking back, I see how things kind of escalated. At that point, I was just scared. But things slowly escalated. I actually went to my company XO for help at one point and said, this is going on, what do I do? And he told me to ignore it. So I trusted him, and I did. And then it got to the point where, again, I couldn't ignore it anymore. And I remember that point was, I found out he was going to get another woman in his command. And suddenly everything crashed in. I was like, I cannot let another woman go through what I've been going through. And I think one of the hardest things I ever did was go in and report to my commander and tell him what was going on. Because given my experience at Fort Lewis, I was fully expecting to be shut down. I was even wondering if I would get an Article 15 myself. And they started an investigation. I was told that more people came out of the woodwork to also file reports. And then I went into work one day, and my commander pulled me aside, and he said, look, this was not your fault. And I went, what? And he said, this person just tried to kill himself. He's in the psych ward. So, keeping in mind that I was already in a bad headspace, I felt like a murderer. I felt like I had put a gun to this man's head and pulled the trigger myself. And things just they spiraled down from there. I did very well for the most part at my work. I threw myself into it. I would volunteer for staff duties. And to give you an idea of what that means, every battalion and every brigade is required to have an officer on duty 24/7. And the staff duty officer would go in and man the desk. They'd conduct security checks. They would, they were the point of contact if anyone needed help. If anyone got in trouble, we were the first person they called. And I realized that I didn't want to be alone over the weekends because I was in such a bad headspace. So I started volunteering for staff duties. Anything that kept me from being by myself.
Right.
Um,
How long are you in at this point, Clara?
oh my goodness. I commissioned in 2012. This was maybe 2013.
Okay.
Actually, yes, it was 2013. I remember it was around the time of my 23rd birthday. Happy birthday to me.
Right.
Yeah.
And by this point, you haven't been offered any kind of formal help, therapeutic help or anything, or?
To be fair to my commander, like my commander at the time was very, very good. And he very much cared about his people and his company. And he made a point of encouraging me to go to therapy. And he made a point of giving me extra support, which I needed. And, the jobs that he gave me, I really did excel at. But the military being what it is,
Sure.
this commander eventually PCS'd, he moved. And I got a new commander and I got new jobs. And, so I had to adapt to that, which was difficult for me looking back.
Right.
And honestly, it was around this time where I was given the opportunity to be the OIC at the National Training Center for my company. So what this means is that I was given command of a detachment of soldiers and told, okay, you are responsible for getting these soldiers to Fort Irwin, California. You're going to train them for deployment. You're going to fall under a battalion that's already there, but you're basically it. Now go. So, well, I did. I needed the affirmation that I was worth something. And every time I did well at my work, it was like, okay, you know what? The demons in my head are lying. Like I actually do matter. And, I was at NTC. I was going, like we were doing all this cool stuff. I am censoring my language, by the way. I'm trying hard not to fall back into the army cursing. But, I went so hard looking back. I failed to take proper care of myself, and I ended up getting a heat injury, which means that I am now very, very sensitive to heat. And my current set of doctors think that that's what the chronic migraines are actually partly from. Anyway, came back to Fort Stewart. I started getting severe migraines. The migraines got severe enough that I would faint. The pain, the way that the neurologist explained it to me, the pain was so severe that my body would shut down. I would end up in the emergency room, rinse and repeat. Eventually, I lost my driver's license because of these blackout episodes. Unfortunately, this being the Army, I still had to get to work. So, I would walk every morning, 5 miles into work, 5 miles back from work. And considering, this was Georgia, and this was the Georgia heat, so that just made my already existing injury worse. Sidebar here. If I had been in a good mental space, looking back, like I probably could have gone, even if my commander at the time hadn't listened, I probably could have gone to my battalion commander and gone like, sir, you cannot make someone with a heat injury walk to work and walk back. But part of my problem was that I felt like I'd lost my voice completely. Oh. I had this physical pain. I had this mental pain. I didn't know or understand if or how they were connected. The Army, they do their best. The medical system does have doctors who really do care about their patients, but there are so many broken soldiers now that it's a difficult patient load to keep up with.
Was there anyone there? I mean, this might seem like such a naive question, but was there anyone there that you could confide in? Oh,
absolutely. And, thank you for bringing that up, actually, because, this is one of the things that, looking back, I realized was a safety net for me. We had a battalion chaplain, and I would frequently go and just talk to my battalion chaplain. It could be very difficult to get behavioral health appointments, because, just again, going back to, not as many soldiers get behavioral health appointments as probably should, but there are also not enough behavioral health providers to actually give soldiers the help that the ones who do want it, need, if that makes sense. But being able to talk to my chaplain was very much a safety net. And also, I had adopted 2 cats. And it's funny because, looking back, like, there were days when I did not want to get out of bed. And then my cats would come over and start headbutting me in that way that cats have, like, excuse me, it's time for breakfast. And I just look at them and go like, okay, well, I've got to get up and give them their food. And then once I was up, I'd go like, okay, I may as well eat now. And then also, I'd be out of groceries and I wouldn't care. I didn't care about much of anything at that point. But then my cats would come up and just kind of look at me and go, we're hungry. And I'd go like, okay, well, I can't starve my cats. So I'd walk down to the local gas station or to the commissary and buy them cat food. And while I was there, I just go, fine, I might as well pick up like a sandwich or something for myself. Also, just being able to be in contact with my family. They were several states away, but fortunately, I don't know what I would have done without cell phone, FaceTime, that sort of thing. I was very lucky.
Wow. So it just sounds like this spiral.
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh. So, okay. So how do things unfold? How do you extricate yourself from all this?
Well, I ended up being sent to the Warrior Transition Unit. And I think it's now called a different name, because you're right, I absolutely was in a spiral. And I think there was enough of me left that, there was some spark in me that still resented that I'd gone from being this very high performing person to spiraling to where I didn't even want to feed myself. So I managed to get assigned to the WTU, the Warrior Transition Unit. And from there, the Army
which is what?
I'm sorry. Yeah, it's basically, they send soldiers there with severe medical problems.
Okay.
And it's for rehabilitation, if possible. And if that's not possible, then they'll help you medically retire. And the Army kind of looked at my records and went like, yeah, thank you for your service, but maybe it's best that you leave. So I medically retired in April of 2016 with a 90% disability rating, which basically means that the Army said, like, between your migraines and your PTSD, you are severely injured. So thank you for your service. Good luck in the civilian world. Now go. But yeah, so I went home for a couple of months, and I really thought that since I was out of the Army, things would get better. After enough time, my neurologist cleared me to start driving again. And then I was offered this job as a peer counselor / victim advocate. Took the job. Again, looking back, I realized I was doing what I always had, which was throwing myself into work to escape my own problems. But I helped, I co-facilitated a teen support group. So I worked with 16 and 17-year-olds and a few 13-year-olds who'd been victims of some sort of abuse. I did individual peer support sessions. I helped people get restraining orders if they needed them. And then, 9 months later, I was in the emergency room, and it was a complete surprise to me, for the record, when the police walked in. But I'd gone to the emergency room for a migraine that wouldn't stop. And like the police walk in and go like, yeah, we need to talk to you. Put a handcuff on my hand and like cuff the other to the stretcher. And then some therapists from the community service board walked in to do an assessment. I was very angry. I did not understand what was going on. I didn't understand why I was handcuffed. I wanted to know what I had done wrong. And the therapist said, well, would you consider going to the psychiatric hospital voluntarily? And I was like, no, take these handcuffs off. I want to go home.
So on what basis were they called to do an assessment?
I had been, so looking back now, I know they were hallucinations.
Okay.
At the time, I thought they were real. I had started hearing voices and seeing people, hallucinations. Most of these voices and hallucinations were people that I had known in the military. Some were not. Some were people that I had met later on. But I really thought, like, the voices were telling me things like, we're going to kill you. We're going to kill your family. We're going to, we're going to kill your pets. And I completely believed them, because when your brain is injured or ill, the perception is the reality. Right. And I had no way of knowing.
And were these voices, Clara, present when you were having a migraine?
No.
Or just at varying times?
All pretty much towards the end, they were omnipresent.
I see. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. I do remember having more migraines, during that time. I'm like, the neurologists and the therapists and the psychiatrists are still debating over the connection between the migraines and the PTSD and the heat injury and the voices. Like, I don't think anybody knows. Right. But, it just got to the point where, if it had not been for my mother and my brother realizing that something was going on, because I cut off all contact. Like, I seriously believed that my family was in danger. And what I did say was strange enough that it got them worried. That 5150, in some states it's called an emergency custody order. That was hellish to go through. It also saved my life.
Can I ask what you think the voices were caused by?
I personally believe that my brain just got to the point where, because like I said earlier, I got out of the Army, I hadn't been going to therapy. There was a lot of unprocessed trauma and guilt and anger and fear that was just kind of stewing unacknowledged in my brain. And, maybe the heat injury had something to do with it. I personally don't think so, because now the PTSD is better and the migraines are still there. Take from that what you will. But, just this miasma of fear. And the feeling of never really having gotten justice, right. If that makes sense.
Oh, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So the 5150 saved your life.
Yes.
What happens after that?
Well, I spent about 8 weeks in the hospital, slowly getting better. And this is actually something that I realized looking back, is that, when you're 5150, all choice, all agency is really taken away from you at that time. I was led out of the emergency room in handcuffs. The police officers were very kind, very polite, but it was policy in the county where I was that if you are a psychiatric patient, you've got to be taken away in handcuffs. Right. And I remember the first day I was there, I was furious and I was scared. And I told the psychiatrist that I was assigned to that I didn't want to take medication because I didn't think I needed it. And he just kind of nodded and went like, okay, well, think about it and we'll talk about it again tomorrow. He knew I was going to be there for a while, even if I didn't. But then it was like something clicked in my brain. It was like, you know what? I still have the ability to make choice and to choose things. And it may not be the choices that I want, but I can at least I haven't lost everything. So I started making small choices that helped me find a sense of control again. I got a couple of other patients together. We were at various levels of functioning. But I made friends with some of the patients and we got together and we would, I kind of led a like mini yoga group. And then we'd work out together. I started teaching one of the other patients ballet because I was bored and there was nothing else to do and she wanted to learn. I would go to groups and I would talk because it was, but I would always kind of reassure myself that, well, I want to talk. Like this is something, if I don't have to, I'm choosing to. And I won't say that it completely removed the anger, but it did go a long way to helping it. And eventually I even told my psychiatrist who, actually it was the second day, I told my psychiatrist, like, look, I can't sleep. Can you give me something for sleep? And he just got this look of like utter shock on his face and was like, yes, you want Seroquel? I was like, okay. And then, I looking back, I actually feel kind of bad about this, but I actually, I went up to one of the nurses and told the nurse that I would be more comfortable with the female psychiatrist. And she made that switch happen. Nothing against the first psychiatrist I was with, but just having that ability to choose and have my choices respected, that was very important to me.
All right. So let's jump to when you get out. What happens?
I got out. I moved home with my family at that point. I would kind of lay in bed for a little while and stare at the ceiling. And then I got mad again. I was like, you know what? Like, I was deeply ashamed of myself. I saw this breakdown as a weakness. My brain was not strong enough to deal with everything that I'd been through. And so it was my fault that I'd had this breakdown. But I decided to try. Yeah, this is another interesting part because I decided that I wanted to try to take a certified nursing assistant course. So I started the CNA course and, I ended up dropping out before it was complete. But even that, I think I spent like 3 weeks in it, but even those 3 weeks just kind of helped me find a sense of like, okay, you know what, this is okay. I can still do things. I can still, I don't know what, I'm going to have to figure that out, but I can still do things. And it was around this time that I actually got involved again with disaster relief through an organization called Team Rubicon. And one of the most important things that I found for my own recovery and when working with people on the crisis hotline is that it's not enough all the time to just recover for yourself. You have to have like a connection to a larger community, a larger purpose. And for me, that was disaster relief. I would go on deployments with this organization. I went up to Pennsylvania twice after really severe flooding. I went down to North Carolina twice after Hurricane Florence had hit. I went to North Carolina after tornadoes had completely devastated one small area. There were some other things, but I was in a community that kind of recognized what I'd gone through because many of the people there were veterans. So even if they didn't, have PTSD from exactly the same thing, although I was honestly surprised at how many did, they understood the struggle. And also I was using my skills to serve, and those skills were valuable. And that was something that I had not felt for a very long time at that point.
Was there a point at which you said when you were in the hospital, obviously you were there for 8 weeks, you were in groups. When you got out, did you continue with any kind of formal therapy?
Yes, I did continue with therapy. It took a while to find a therapist that worked for me.
Sure.
And I got very, very lucky when I did. This therapist and I have worked together for probably close to 3 years.
Wow.
No, wait, longer. I can't do math, but we've worked together for a while now.
What clicked for you with this therapist?
I think it was the fact that she saw what I'd been through, but she didn't feel pity. She kind of looked at it. She would look me in the eye. She would nod. She would say, "That absolutely sucks." Right. And I'm sorry, and you shouldn't have had to go through it. What are you going to do about it?
Right. Then before you go, conversely, with the previous therapist you tried, what didn't work? Or didn't click, rather, for you?
She let me BS. I didn't even realize I was doing it, but I would get very good at avoiding topics that I didn't want to talk about. And I think it's important for therapists to recognize that and respect that, but also I'm not quite sure how to put this, but it's a very fine line between allowing the client to just kind of run rings around things they don't want to look at.
Right.
And encouraging them to face their whatever demon that may be.
Sure.
It also, I think, kind of, for me anyway, and obviously I can't speak for the entire client population, but for me, it kind of facilitated a sense of victimhood, like the sense that I wasn't strong enough to face what I'd been through, and that it was best that I just do my best to ignore it and lock it behind a door and pretend that it never existed, which really didn't help me at all.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much here, and I so appreciate you coming on here and contacting me and being willing to stand up and talk. How did you have the guts to come on this podcast and talk? Seriously, talk about this.
Sure. So, I think a lot of it is just the sense of anger, honestly. I guess you could also call it passion. But I realize now that what I went through was not right and was not okay. And while I was in the Army, I did my best to advocate for other soldiers who were going through the same or similar things. I remember that I would actually get up in front of my company when I was comfortable with the commander, and they had mandatory SHARP briefs. SHARP is military speak for sexual harassment and response prevention. It's an acronym, but basically it's supposed to be a way for soldiers who experience sexual harassment or assault, ideally both men and women, because male-on-male sexual assault is a lot more common in the military than people realize or appreciate. That's a whole nother podcast. But I would get up with them and I would I would get up in front of my company and I would tell part of my story, not the whole thing. I don't know if I'll ever tell the whole thing, honestly, but I wanted them to know that, it was, looking back, it's actually kind of weird because I didn't feel capable of advocating for myself, but I was very, very good at advocating for other people. And I actually had soldiers come forward and, I helped. I won't give numbers, but I helped quite a few. I had one soldier who I got a phone call. She was a former platoon member of mine. And after I'd left that position, I got a call from that commander and went like, hey, this soldier just tried to kill herself. The only person that she'll talk to is you. Can you come back in to, can you come into the hospital? Now, to me, that's actually not a success story.
Mm-hmm.
It's more of an indictment of the military that I was the only leader that she felt comfortable talking to. But by the time I got out of the Army, I just had all of this anger and all of this rage that so many people had been through this sort of thing, and they didn't have anyone. Now I call that Joan of Arc Syndrome now. And that was what led me to take the job that I did well before I was ready for it. But I'm now at the point, I think, in healing that I actually can get up and realize, it doesn't just have to be me taking on the world.
Mm-hmm.
If I talk enough about this to other people, to other people who may be listening, who are not professionals, but are interested in the topic, to professional therapists, maybe we can actually create the change that needs to be changed. That sounded a lot better in my head, but
Is there any movement on the awareness of
mm-hmm.
military sexual assault going on in the service now?
To some degree, yes. I have some friends who are still in the service who are tremendous advocates in their own right. But unfortunately, I think what happens for every movement, there's a backlash. And often what happens in the military is that the brass will see a problem and they will want to address it. So they'll issue like a general order, well, not general order, but they'll issue an order to the military, to the Army, going like, okay, we need to fix this. Perfect example, when I was still at Fort Stewart, they started a bystander intervention training program. And the idea was, well, MST and other serious incidents are on the rise. So instead of saying like, hey, don't do bad things,
Right.
which, you would think would be innate, but okay, whatever. The idea was, why don't we train soldiers to intervene when they see something bad happening? Right. And it doesn't just have to be sexual assault. What if you see somebody like shoplifting a video game from the exchange or the PX? What if you see somebody like, I don't know, about to smoke marijuana, which may be legal in many states, but in the military is pretty much a guaranteed way to get kicked out, no benefits.
Right.
So you see movements like that, and you see them adopted by battalions, but there's a whole lot of skepticism in the lower rank and file, because sometimes there's a sense that like company level leadership isn't all that sincere about actually like implementing these changes.
Mm-hmm.
They're checking the block, like, they want to put it on their OER, their officer evaluation report. So they said, yes, sir, I trained 100% of my soldiers in this. Right. And actually it was a soldier sitting there looking at a PowerPoint that was basically like, you should not rape people.
Right.
Thanks, sir. Great training.
What are you doing now, Clara? As we kind of wind down here.
Mm-hmm. So I just finished my first course in clinical mental health counseling, taking it very slow. Again, I don't want to go into Joan of Arc Syndrome and End up right back where I started. I still do quite a bit of volunteer work. Again, big shout out to Team Rubicon. I kind of got to get out there. So I've been involved with them for a while. I did do quite a bit of work on crisis hotlines, but I recently learned actually that my husband and I are expecting a little girl.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
Thank you. We are both absolutely over the moon. But I decided to kind of take a step back from everything, just to make sure that stress doesn't impact her, that I have a safe and healthy pregnancy. And then after that, we'll just see what happens.
Right.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
You're so you're so friggin' inspiring.
Oh, well, thank you.
You're welcome. And you have such a voice that, I think this is going to be, I know this is going to be really valuable for a lot of people. And I just feel that getting your voice out and you doing whatever you can to get your voice out is really going to be helpful.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. This is something that, as you could probably tell, I am very passionate about. And I think there's so many people who they can speak, they've just forgotten that they can.
Yeah.
And I hope this helps them remind them that one day they'll get their voice back.
Well, I'd love to have you back at some point.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely at a later date, and we can certainly figure out what we can talk about. But what would you say now is your mission? Is where are you finding meaning?
So, since I learned that I am pregnant with my daughter, right now a lot of my focus is on her, because I want her to be able to go out into the world knowing that she can kick butt, but that if she doesn't, if she has a few trips, a few stumbles or mini stumbles, that's okay too. I'd say that's my primary focus. Other than that, I'm doing a lot of writing, and really, I don't even know what I would call myself. Just like a big mouth, maybe. But just trying to help other people find the opportunities for healing and connection that I found that helped me so much, to the point where I am able to, actually have a really happy marriage and a beautiful baby on the way.
That is awesome. One final question here.
Mm-hmm.
If you were speaking to, I don't know if I want to just keep this to women who are going into the service, but
mm-hmm.
You can determine. If you were going to talk to women who were going into the service, what would you say to them?
First, I would say, congratulations and thank you. It actually does take a lot of guts to even volunteer to go into the service. And then I would say, don't go in afraid, go in smart, go in cautious, and don't be afraid to speak if something happens. You have the right to be heard. You deserve to be heard. And there are enough of us, especially now, that will listen and believe you. And the more people who speak, the stronger that force will become.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Clara, I want to thank you so much for coming on here. Amazing with your little girl about to be born. When's the due date?
October. Yeah, okay. October 1st.
Okay, awesome. Look, it was a pleasure meeting you and having you on here. Thank you so much.
Likewise, thank you.
All right, take care.
You too.
Thank you so much for listening and supporting this podcast. And if you'd like to join the hundreds of other therapists who are each month keeping up to date and informed and inspired about what's going on in the world of trauma, I'd love to invite you to head on over to the Trauma Therapist newsletter. That's the traumatherapistnewsletter.com.